Brilliant people going to share with us. So let's just take that got it bit on the recording. Two fantastic guests. First of all, a friend of mine, Martyn Payne, who has, it's difficult to put into a short sentence or two the amount of experience that Martyn brings in terms of storytelling. Martyn retired a couple of years ago from Bible Reading Fellowship. BRF, was involved in things like Messy Church, has written a number of books, and we're really excited about what Martyn will share with us. And also fellow Children and Youth Development Officer Ruth White, who's based in the Wessex Synod, and we're delighted that Ruth can be with us as well, and Ruth's going to share a little bit later. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Martyn and ask you to share with us, Martyn. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. You can all hear me okay? I hope so. Yeah, good. Lovely to see you. I recognize a couple of faces amongst you all, and maybe you've also met me at some stage. I was just talking to Ruth, and she remembers meeting me, and I can't remember every time I've met her. Anyway, but it's really good to be with you. I'm speaking from East London, or Northeast London. That's where I'm from, and that doesn't really matter. But yes, you're very generous in your introduction there, Richard. I've been involved with storytelling in all sorts of ways. Lots of schools work, telling stories in assemblies, in the classroom, in dramatic ways, in more focused godly play type ways. Also, lots of work in churches, of course, and I've been involved with Messy Church and some of the storytelling involved there. Anyway, that's my background, basically. I do feel I've tumbled into storytelling in lots of ways, but I do feel it's so special. That's why I've given my heart to it more and more over these last years. I wanted to sort of do my 7 or 8 minutes slot on sort of some basics about storytelling as far as I can understand. By the way, forgive me the background. I haven't got a neat background. There's all sorts of visual aids in my background, but ignore all those. Anyway, it's about the basics. It's about the framework to storytelling that I want to explore. And I've got sort of 7 frames, as it will, 7 pieces of the framework that have helped me. So it's not actually trying to tell you a story or give you a particular very tight template. It's more the framework for storytelling. And some of them might surprise you, some are almost too obvious. But my first one is where you tell the story is really important, that the place, the where you are, using where you are, and being aware of the situation around you. That sounds a bit obvious maybe, but sometimes we tumble in and start telling a story. We don't take into account the place we're telling it. Now, interestingly, of course, lots of Bible stories, if you're telling Bible stories, happened outdoors. And so you've actually got to connect, therefore, wherever you are with this outdoor storytelling. And during COVID and after COVID, and as we emerge from it all, I know a lot of you pups have done outdoor events. So I've become more and more conscious of the importance of the outdoor space where I tell stories, or if I'm indoors, remembering that actually the story is happening outdoors. So using the place has been very important to me. Of course, the Bible stories were told around the fire in the wilderness. They were told in the open air, and what was around them helped those stories to be shaped. The fire was burning, so you had light and dark, or you had the clouds above you in the sky gathering, so that you thought about the thunderstorm that might produce the flood, or the stars in the sky, and so on. So the outdoor space is really special. So think carefully about where you're telling the story, the place for your story. That will help the story begin to be shaped. And the birds of the air in the sky, for example, or if it's raining, which has happened to me in storytelling before now, that becomes part of how we create the story together. So place is my first one. The second one is imagination. Oh, imagine. Actually, we live in a time where we've got lots of stuff coming into our heads to help us with our imagination. We watch films with CGI, we've got incredible things that we see on screen, but actually God has given us the most amazing imagination. It's part of the giftedness of who we are. I think it's part of our likeness to God. So engaging the imagination of those you're storytelling with, engaging your own imagination, is a hugely important part of this framework. Igniting that imagination. Now, that's often ignited with very simple phrases. Sometimes you can make connections to events and places and things that have happened. The feeling of being lost, for example, that's in lots of stories. People have been through those experiences. So what about getting the imagination working and feeding on that imagination? We don't actually have to be in the ark, but we've been in boats. We don't have to have been in the desert, but we have been in lonely places. So using what has happened to people and reigniting their memories of those places and what they see and what they felt and all the rest of it. So getting the imaginations working. Children's imaginations, if you're telling stories with children, are great, aren't they? They can very quickly see stuff that's not there but is there. Their minds are living in the world of the unseen as much as what's in front of them. So use their imagination. Bubbles around them. We had a play group recently, and the bubbles were part of the storytelling, and they are in another place straight away. So allowing their imaginations to be ignited. So we've got the place is important, and we've got the imagination that's important. These are frameworks that help all storytelling to go well. A big one, and it segues from imagination very easily into this, it's the senses. Now this works for different people in different ways. We're gifted with at least 5 senses. Maybe there's almost a 6th sense we have too, which we can talk about, but there's not time now. But the sense of something we can't see but is there. But the senses, stories work well if you can spark off the awareness of how they connect to your different senses. When I do a Bible story, for example, I read it carefully lots of times and almost read it with one sense in mind at first. What can I hear in this story? What sounds are there? And then I might go through again and actually, what can I see in this story? This links to the whole area of Lectio Divina and the various ways in which you might explore a passage, and Ignatian spirituality, where you try to be there and see everything. So you see the story. You're actually there in the crowd with Jesus, or you're watching something happen. Oh, someone's just going to answer that phone in a moment. And I hope just a moment. Apologies. And then so you've got hearing, you've got seeing, touching. What do you touch in this story? You can see where I'm going. What do you smell in this story? Yes, smelling as well, very powerful sense. And what do you taste in this story? So when you read a story, read it through the filters of those different senses, and that will often spark off in you a way to tell the story, because we've got different strengths, haven't we? I find sounds, having just had that sound, I find sounds very interesting. So when I read a Bible story, I'm thinking, what am I hearing here? What sounds are there? And you might even find you can tell a story just by a series of very easy, enable it to come alive. So don't cram every sense in, but go with the one that brings your imagination alive, and also make sure that it connects therefore to other people's senses in different ways. So we've got the place, and we've got the idea of where are we on my notes? The place and using the imagination and the senses. The fourth one is interesting for me. I often end up carrying a basket of visual aids with me, sometimes a box of visual aids, sometimes too many visual aids. And as I look back over my time telling stories, I think I deeply long for the day when I don't need many visual aids. It's interesting to think about our Lord Jesus. Did he have visual aids? Did he carry a basket or with him? Of course he didn't. He just used what was to hand, didn't he? He used what was there. And so I feel that sometimes we should actually discard the very fancy visual aids we put together. That there are some clever ones, I know, we've all used certain ones that, you know, that have worked, but actually using what's to hand in the place you end up may be your best way into a story. Our Lord, our Jesus did this, and he picked up the corn and talked about the ears of corn, or, you know, he was down by the fishing nets and there were fish still squiggling in the nets, and so he, you know, a story arose from it. They were out on the lake, and, you know, whatever, all the different things that were around him. He used what was there at the time rather than work rather over cleverly to bring something in. I remember I did a visual aid about Noah's Ark once that very cleverly turned into the name of Jesus. Anyway, but trouble is people remember that visual aid and forget something else very often. So just use what's there in your hands, what's easily to pick up. It might even be in your pocket. That could be something that could become part of the story. The jangling of coins in your pocket might just be what you want to use rather than all the preparation you've done. And that links in, segues again into using the moment. Now, this is a challenge, and I find myself by practice getting this to happen more. I was telling a story in our assembly because we've got some live assemblies happening again, thankfully. The children are coming back to our little church and we're having some assemblies. And what's interesting there is that things happen that you could not plan. Things happen that, yeah, things go wrong or just in the normal course of things, but it's using those unplanned surprise things. It's getting close to being a bit more extempore about it, about being a bit more improvised about your storytelling, but it's drawing in the moment that happens, the thing that's said in response. You know how, back to children, the things they say are always amazing. They blow you away. Also, they completely throw you off track if you've got too much of a one-track story in your mind. But if you can use that moment, that is so good in helping the story then to really connect with the people in front of you. So we've got what's in your hand, using the moment, using your senses, using your imagination, using where you are. I've got two more. Using our passions. That sounds a bit strange, but what I mean is, unless you feel passionate about whatever story it is you're telling, I don't think you can tell it very well. Unless you feel this story is important to tell, unless this story sets you alight with interest or sets you alight with questions or wondering or annoyance, it doesn't matter what it is, unless it ignites your interest and your passion, you can't tell the story. So get into the story in a way that helps you to be excited by what you're saying. We just come back from a conference, a few of us, a Messy Church International Conference, and the main speaker there told us a really weird story from the Old Testament, but actually she was so passionate about it, we were drawn in. We couldn't help but listen to her story. And she kept saying, I'm passionate about this story because it tells us so much that's important. So your passions are really important, the way you feel about the story. And lastly, I must watch my time. Lastly, instincts. I do think we do have some inbuilt storytelling instincts. You've told stories to children. If you're a parent or a grandparent, you might tell stories to children and others too. You know that stories have a frame to them. We need a beginning, a way into the story, something that gets us into the place, into the mood, into the feelings. Or, I mean, traditionally it's once upon a time, or it might be a phrase like, are you ready for this story? I've got a great story today. This story takes us into a wild and dangerous place. Whatever it is, the beginnings, and you might know from Godly Play, there's various interesting beginnings they use that set the start. But stories have a start, they have a middly bit, okay, where you might wander around, who knows. Then there's a turning point in the story. This is the framework, this is quite helpful, the key moment, and then you tumble towards some sort of conclusion, although that might not be the end, it might be the beginning of something new. It's quite useful, I find, when doing that, to actually have the opening line of your story, even written on your hand somewhere if you want to, and then the middle turning point somewhere, and then how you're going to end the story. The great danger is, and it's going to happen with me at this talk now, where's my end point? How do I come to an end? Where's the end moment? And we need to have an end moment that helps us round the story off, but yet still leave it open in some way. Use repetition in your story. I don't mean repeating the same line. I mean building up the feeling of something by something that's almost the same. It was a dark, dark place. People couldn't see what was happening. There was a feeling of fear. You often in threes, you put things together in threes to build up the sense of the place, the sense of the story. And so I'm going to stop there. So my end is, remember those different things. Okay.
Thank you so much, Martyn. I thought I was helping you out there by giving you an abrupt ending.
Yes, you took over my ending. That's very good. Thank you.
There's so much there for us to reflect upon, and you'll get opportunity in a minute or two once we've heard from Ruth. You might want to take some of those questions or comments you've had from what Martyn said to us into the breakout room and have a conversation there. But Ruth, we're delighted that you're able to share with us as well. So if you want to unmute and share with us, and I'll spotlight you, here we are.
Oh, lovely. I'm nice and large. Thank you. I could listen to Martyn all day. So if none of you come to my breakout, I'm going to be with you in Martyn's, getting some more gems. So a little bit about my background. So I'm Jewish background. So my family were Jewish. So stories are our bread and butter. Very much the five senses as well, and lots of alcohol normally. Theatre school trained. I went to be a stand-up comedian for a few years in Manchester. So I'm all about observing what's around you and observational humour, which led me to being a children's entertainer, magician and storyteller, which I love to this day. I still love doing that in my current job. That led me to Youth for Christ as a schools worker. From there went on to Hope UK, using storytelling techniques to educate children about their bodies and being healthy and not getting involved in the wrong substances. And now I'm a Children and Youth Development Officer for Wessex South. So stories are a massive part of my life. I love stories, I love storytelling, I love listening to stories, and I'm looking forward, if we do have some in my breakout room, to sharing stories with you tonight and hearing your stories as well. So I wonder what your favourite story was as a child. I wonder if you can think of what your favourite... I couldn't think of one. I thought of four. Gingerbread Man, perhaps, or Little Red Hen. That was one of mine. Feel free to pop them in the chat as they come to mind if you have your chat box open. We are story-shaped people, as Martyn was saying. We've got story-shaped minds. None more so than your 0 to 5s. And that's what I've been invited to come and particularly think about tonight. Stories dominate a 0 to 5's life. The wind in the willows. I'm going to get very distracted by these stories. I'll stop looking. Sadly, I find that many of us grow out of stories and storytelling, which is really sad, and we forget the enjoyment and the opportunities to discuss things that stories can bring us. So I'm hoping that if nothing else tonight, we'll all be refreshed again to go away and just tell some stories and share stories together again. Let's think about the under 5s briefly then. So for them, life is all about stories, whether it's a nursery rhyme that harps back to something that happened in history, a tissue, we all fall down, that teach about, or the more modern day nursery rhymes that teach about everyday things. They're cartoons and their TV shows, all very story based. They're picture books that the baby is given, with black and white pictures to start with, and then building in colour as the age develops. Full of colours and shapes and patterns and textures. Have you come across those series? That's not my series. Oh my goodness me, if that's not a Christian book waiting to happen, that's not my Jesus. I think somebody should do that book. Textures that grab interest and the attention of the baby and begin to open up the world around the baby. to the baby. Moving on to books with occasional words, patterns of rhyme and repetition, often telling children social stories. Stories about the princess who learnt to use the potty, or stories about the rainbow fish who learnt that if we share, we make friends easier, or even stories about the selfish crocodile, or even stories about what to do if a tiger comes to tea. Stories that the under 5s sing, watch, read, listen to and imagine, and stories that they can enjoy with others, and perhaps stories that they return to again and again and again. If you remember reading the same book to your child over and over and over again because it was one of their favourites. Stories are a huge part in the under 5s. So how can we use stories in our ministry with children? How can we use that power and the place that story has in their lives to nurture and develop and enable their spirituality and their faith development? So just a few threads to think about, and then we can go to breakout room with Martyn. Use them. Just use them. Use stories. Please, please, please use them. Think about how you're using them, why you're using them, and when you are using them as well. Too often, especially in toddler groups, I think we put the story at the wrong time. We put it right at the end. Often it's like a settle down, calm them all down while we clear the room technique of storytelling. I always think they're thinking, what a shame, if we'd started with one of these stories, we would have, everything else would have been, as to use Martyn's words, framed by that story. We could have, all our play, all our conversations would have been around the themes of that story naturally happening. We wouldn't have had to force that. So let's shift the story back to a more prominent position potentially. Be intentional about the stories you use. What are the themes that we want to encourage young children to explore and play with? Which Bible stories are we using with young ages and why? I think it's very bizarre that one of our first Christian stories we have is meeting Jesus at the Nativity. Fabulous. And then we skip all the Jesus stories for ages, and we dwell in many of the Old Testament stories where God is punishing the earth and drowning everybody, but we're learning our animals through the story. It's very strange to me. Stories becoming hooks and threads in a child's mind and spirit then go on to make connections and encourage them to explore the themes widely. We can use modern parables, and we might do some of that in my breakout room if we get together. We can use them in an intentional way. Exploring God and God's love for us simply by using Guess How Much I Love You, perhaps. Something I did recently. Or use the boy who lost his belly button to think about how we are God's children and our lives have the evidence to show that we belong to God. So let's use modern parables as well as Bible stories. Use story skills to grow the child's spirituality. Where is God in this story is a really useful phrase, even for under 5s. They can have those conversations. I'm not going to talk about the 5 senses because my friend did that. Find the balance between being creative storytelling, and simply using a book, because both are needed. How do we create young storytellers is the other thing I wanted to raise. Whether it's small play, them telling their own stories, retelling stories, involving them with finger rhymes, actions, shout outs, repetitions. Let's enable children not just to listen to stories, but to be storytellers. Where have you seen God this week is a good question. I'm going to stop. How do you support parents as being storytellers too? Would be something I would like to explore. I will say I will not be offended if nobody comes to play in my breakout room because we've got Martyn. Let's all go to him if necessary. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ruth, and also thank you to Martyn. So hopefully my